talk this morning about one of our recurring themes, which is avoidance versus acceptance. And we talk about it a lot. We talk about it as pretty central to the practice. And this notion that we avoid or withdraw from or find aversive anything which is painful, uncomfortable, unacceptable, aversive, whatever. But it's important to remember also that all avoidance is not unskillful. Sometimes it's, at least in the short term, protective and adaptive. For example, based on some work I've done, I can tell you that first responders often need to learn how to avoid emotional openness, at least in the moment. When dealing with some of the stuff they encounter. So for them, at least in the short term, avoidance can be adaptive. They don't have the luxury of acceptance when they're in the midst of a horrific crash scene or whatever. So that's why we offer them critical incident debriefing after the scene. Then they can deal with the avoidance that was necessary, because what we don't want to have happen is have them, continue to push away and avoid after the fact, which can create trauma, lasting trauma, and so forth. So we offer them critical incident debriefing. But there are situations where we're in where avoidance is adaptive. It's one reason we human beings evolved to avoid certain circumstances and situations. But our challenge is to bring our mindful discernment to differentiate between skillful and unskillful avoidance, when we want to do one and when we want to do other. But generally speaking, if you think about this criteria, when avoidance is an attempt to control what we don't like, suppress it, push it away, whatever, that tends to be unskillful. That tends to be problematic. For most of us, overextending control, trying to have too much control, is a problem. When avoidance is an attempt to control our world and the circumstances of our world, we're pretty much guaranteed to suffer. And this is especially true when we try to control our inner world, when we try to control our unpleasant emotions, thoughts, sensations, and so forth, when we try to repress them, deny them, push them away, engage in distracting activity, what we call in psychology experiential avoidance, meaning we're trying to avoid that experiential phenomenon, that thing that's going on. So it's what I always say is it's never wise to get into a wrestling match with our unpleasant internal experiences, because we're probably going to lose and we're just going to feel worse, and it's just going to exacerbate the thing we're trying to avoid. That's why we talk about leaning into things which are unpleasant, accepting them. But at the end of the day, the practice is not about avoiding the suffering in the world. It's not about saying I don't want to pretend that there's no suffering, but nor is it about trying to take it on, when there's little we can do to change it. So the challenge is really facing it, accepting it without being overwhelmed by it, which is a pretty tall order. Okay. But this doesn't mean by accepting it we become comfortable with the status quo, and to heck with everything else. So for instance, the first hint that we have about this is that meditation is not just passive withdrawal into this mental cocoon. Okay, it's actually really hard, and things that are passive tend to be easy, right? Okay, so watching TV for a half an hour is no big deal. I mean, that's easy to do. But watching our mind for a half an hour can be a little more challenging, because there's a lot going on and there's a lot of stuff coming up, hitting us, triggering us, and so forth. And the truth of mindfulness, paying a direct attention to our thoughts and feelings and sensations in the present moment, we find that not is all peaceful. At least not in the easy sense of the word. That stuff can be pretty challenging. And all of us that have practiced this meditation thing know this, Okay. And that's what I meant about not trying to push that away. We don't get attached to it. We don't get pulled into the story of it, but we do accept it, note it. As Rumi says in his wonderful poem, we welcome it in for a cup of tea, but then we move on. We acknowledge its impermanence. We acknowledge the impermanence of that which is unpleasant, negative, feels bad, or whatever. But it's hard. And it's hard because coming back to the moment again and again with all that going on is really a push against habit. It's a revolution against the habits we formed over the years. It's a rebellion against this cultural tendency to always avoid that which is unpleasant when we experience it or feel it. Okay. This practice asks us to push back against, rebel against this tendency to avoid anything that's unpleasant. Everything in the media, everything in advertising, everything in our world says you shouldn't feel bad. You know, if you do, something's wrong with you. Push it away. Go buy something to feel better. Go pick up a drink to feel better, whatever. Okay. But it is this chronic avoidance of all that that's unpleasant that is the core of this mindless consumer culture in which we live. I mean, it's why we're always out there busy, buying stuff, accumulating stuff, doing stuff, running around, checking our phones, checking our Facebook, whatever, because we don't want to feel the unpleasantness. We don't want to, we want to avoid it. We don't want to accept it. You know, without real transformation in that tendency, then our practice is going to stall, okay? But that transformation is what Buddhist practice is all about. And it extends into the world, because then we go into the world, you know, we've put our oxygen mask in the plane on first. They can go into the world and help others put their mask on, okay? But to practice meditation consistently, to practice acceptance of that which is unpleasant, and operate from that stance, is to constantly push back against this tidal wave of materialism that's killing the planet. I mean, let's be clear. You know, our practice is the work of acceptance, not avoidance. And that means internal and external. Okay, we accept what's real, facing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. And we talk about that all the time. Facing things as they are, the truth of what is, not as we wish them to be. And we do that on a foundation of mindfulness, acceptance, transformation that's beyond habit, and then we're off to the races. Then this is the challenge with our practice. Acceptance of things as they are, not avoiding. But we need to understand all the ways in which we avoid, all the distractions, all the actions, all the mental gymnastics, everything we do to avoid. And as I said, meditation is not easy. It's hard. There's lots of stuff to contend with if we really do it seriously. You know, if we spend the 30 minutes making our grocery list, we're really not, that's just another form of avoidance. Okay, we have to be present with the stuff that's uncomfortable, because once we accept it, it doesn't have the same grip on us. The grip is released. And that is the promise of this path. That is the promise that the Buddha offered us. So enough about that from me. Let's get your thoughts about it.